right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. My name is Jim Schoaf. I'm a senior fellow here in the Asia program. I run the Japan program here, and it's my pleasure to host you today on Victory Wednesday. I thought about wearing my Nationals hat during the entire event, but I'm going to hold off. I don't want to jinx anything, but congratulations to them for last night. So something slightly less stressful today. We'll talk about China risk and China opportunity, and it's really my pleasure to talk to you a little bit before we get started about this collaboration with the Japan Forum on International Relations and Professor Kamiya, Matake Kamiya, who's been the real kind of leader of this project, and we've worked together now for a couple of years on this China risk, China opportunity for the U.S. Japan alliance. We had a productive workshop all day yesterday with a team of Americans and Japanese scholars, and in its simplest form, this project begins with an understanding that a strong and assertive China presents both risks and opportunities for the United States and Japan individually and collectively as an alliance. Growing economic strength creates business opportunities, and the Belt and Road Initiative of China's can really help provide infrastructure and stimulate growth in Asia. But its economic strength can also be used as leverage for political aims or to boost competitiveness at the expense of U.S. and Japanese firms. So we've talked about economic issues in our workshop. Similarly, China's growing military power and sophistication can help in peacekeeping operations, disaster relief, possibly even counterproliferation. But with the growing tension we see in South China Sea, East China Sea, and elsewhere, it also leads to military coercion and other concerns that feeds a security dilemma in the region. And so we've looked at economic security and also regional order, global order issues in the project. And in our second year, we produced, co-authored between all the different partners, a series of 9 policy briefs or papers. All of them at one point were sitting outside, but I think some of our copies have flown off the shelves there. But there is a piece of paper on the table there that lists all of the papers and the authors and the URL where they're downloadable. They're all relatively short, 8 to 12 pages, and a collaborative effort looking at risks and opportunities from both the U.S. and Japanese perspectives. And Professor Kamiya will talk a little bit more about the origin of the project in that regard. So last fall, we focused a lot on North Korea when we had our presentation here with a number of the project members, and trade issues are still high on the agenda this year. But today we wanted to broaden a little further and talk about Southeast Asia, the free and open Indo-Pacific in the context of China risk and China opportunity, and also we'll talk a little bit. Some of the members of our Japan team talked with China scholars about our papers to get some of their reaction to what Japanese and Americans think about China risk and China opportunity, and there's some interesting things there. So before I introduce our speakers, I'll just talk a little bit about the main theme today. We called this event Moving Target. And I think it ended up just in the last week or so proving even more so the case. We have the potential for some kind of U.S.-China Phase 1 trade deal that possibly President Trump and Xi Jinping will sign in Chile in just a few weeks. But then we have new entity list designations of Chinese firms, other trade friction and private sector friction continuing. We have the U.S. slapping new restrictions on Chinese diplomats and their freedom of diplomacy here in the United States as a form of what the U.S. Describes as reciprocity because of the limitations placed on American diplomats in China. The Hong Kong Human Rights Act, Human Rights and Democracy Act, passed the House last week, which, if it passes the Senate, would present the Trump administration with a real question, a real challenge about whether it would sign that and take the Hong Kong issue more front and center into a U.S.-China relationship debate. And then, meanwhile, Japan has been warming ties with China. Just resumed some limited naval drills with the PLA Navy between the Maritime Self-Defense Force and the PLA Navy just last week for the first time since 2011. And Xi Jinping, of course, is planned to go to Tokyo next spring. So this idea of moving target and how do we maintain policy coordination within the alliance, I think, is as relevant as ever. And I'm very pleased that we have our panel team members here to talk about some of these issues. So I'll introduce our panel members. First of all, our main coordinator and collaborator, Matake Kamiya. He's professor of international security studies at the National Defense Academy of Japan. He's also director and senior principal research fellow at the Japan Forum on International Relations, and as well an adjunct research fellow at the Japan Institute for International Affairs. And it's JFIR that's our primary partner in this project. Professor Shin Kawashima is professor in the Department of International Relations at the University of Tokyo, where he specializes in modern Chinese diplomatic history. As a matter of fact, his first book on the formation of modern Chinese diplomacy won the Suntory Academic Prize back in 2004. A terrific China scholar from Japan. And of course, Carla Freeman, our neighbor next door at Johns Hopkins SAIS. She's associate research professor of China studies at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and executive director of the SAIS Foreign Policy Institute. And she's also the editor-in-chief of Asian Perspective, published by Johns Hopkins. So with that long introduction, now we've got the rest of the people arrived here, seated and comfortable. I'm going to turn to each of our panelists to open with some opening comments. Then we're going to have a little discussion here and then invite the audience to join in. So Kamiya Sensei, I give you the first discussion.
Thank you, Jim. So the question is, our main question is, how should we address a continually rising, increasingly self-assertive China? Wrestling with this challenge is particularly significant for our two countries, Japan and the United States, because we have worked proactively to build and maintain the existing liberal rules-based international order for the past several decades through the alliance. If you don't like the term liberal here, you can say that free and open rules-based international order, well, you know what I mean. Since 2017, JFIR and Carnegie have collaborated together, formed a small group of scholars from two countries led by Jim Schoff and myself to examine this issue, of how to address to a, continually rising, increasingly self-assertive China through two lenses of risk and opportunity. And the team includes not only China experts like Professor Kawashima, but also alliance specialists on Asia-Pacific international security, not only security, but trade and economic and security and wide international relations in the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific. So we are the mixture of many type of experts on the issue related to China today. Our project started from the shared recognition among the Japanese and American members of the project that China today represents a far more complex international actor than was the Soviet Union during the Cold War years. In the Cold War years, for many countries in the world, particularly for Western liberal democracies, including Japan and the United States, the Soviet Union was simply a security threat. It was an enemy. The degree of interdependence between the West and Soviet Union was very, very low, as you know. And the level of human, economic, and other types of exchange between them were minimal, almost zero. So the Soviet Union was a security challenge, or to put it more candidly, an enemy, and not a country with which we wanted to promote cooperation. But today's China is different. For many countries in the world, China represents simultaneously a country that poses serious security challenges and presents opportunities for cooperation. On the security front, I don't think that I need a detailed explanation, but China today represents a source of serious risk to many countries in the world, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region and particularly to Japan and to the United States. As current Japan's National Defense Program guidelines point out, quote, China engages in unilateral coercive attempts to alter the status quo based on its own assertions that are incompatible with the existing international order, unquote. As the U.S. DoD's Indo-Pacific Strategy Report published this June alarms, many in the world worries that China may be trying to revise the existing rules-based international order, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And the risks associated with China's rise are not limited to the security field. In the economic arena, China's so-called predatory industrial policies generate risks to other countries and particularly to the United States and Japan that cannot be ignored. However, at the same time, China also represents a country with which all the countries in the world, including our two countries, most want to cooperate when possible. The most obvious opportunity China presents are, of course, in economic field. Every country in the world is trying to benefit from its economic relations with the world's second largest economy and the source of new emerging technologies. But another more subtle type of opportunity that China offers relates to the maintenance and stability of the international order. Yes, there is an increasing concern in the international society, and particularly in our two countries, that Chinese assertiveness could lead to the destabilization of the existing liberal rules-based international order. But we have to accept the fact that the international order cannot be stable without cooperation from the second largest economy in the world. For example, while the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the Belt and Road Initiative of China have raised concern about the so-called debt trap diplomacy by China, these two initiatives can have positive impact on the stability of regional order in the Indo-Pacific if China pursues these objectives, these projects, not only for its own narrowly defined self-interest, national interest, but also to provide international public goods to the region. And unless big countries share their responsibilities to provide international public goods, as I said, international order cannot be sustained stably. And here we have a very difficult situation where China, in one sense, is becoming a source of, undermining the existing international order, but we need China's cooperation to sustain the stable international order. And so far, I think Japan and the United States as allies basically share a common perception toward an increasingly assertive China, and the policy toward China have been basically well coordinated. Our policies toward China have been basically well coordinated. However, in recent years, some perception gaps with regard to risks and opportunities China poses to the world and to us have surfaced between the two allies. I'm worried. If left unattended, such perception gap could lead to an increasing strain in the U.S.-Japan policy coordination vis-à-vis China. I'd like to repeat. So far, we have been doing basically reasonably well. But emerging perception gap between two of us could lead to a more strained policy coordination between the two countries if unattended. For example, there are differences or gaps in reasons or causes why Japan and the United States is wary of China. While Japan is mostly concerned with security issues caused by China, the United States is concerned with a wider range of China problems. For Japan, the main cause of its wariness over China has been security, in particular, the Senkaku Island issue and China's military expansion. Japan is also worried that the existing rules-based order is under increasing strain in the face of the rise of increasingly assertive China. The United States, I think, share these concerns, but for the United States, the cause of its recent wariness over China has been more wide, and maybe we can say more systemic than in Japan's case. Americans worry about China has not only by security reasons, but also by, for example, perception of intensifying competition between the United States and China for preeminence in the world, superiority in technological sphere, including 5G, China's possible undermining of American values in the world, China's attitude toward human rights issues, including the behavior in Xinjiang and more recently in Hong Kong and so on and so forth. So in a sense, the depth of American wariness over China is now greater than that of Japan's. This could introduce some difficulties in policy coordination between the two allies vis-à-vis China in future. In addition, geographical difference between Japan and the United States has also caused some perception gaps between the two countries with regard to China risk and China opportunity. I actually wrote the proposal to get funding for this project in November 2016, very shortly after President Trump won the presidential election that year. And at that time, while Japan tended to emphasize the risk aspect of China's rise, the United States tended to be attracted to the opportunities presented by the Chinese economy. I thought both approaches are, insufficient or inappropriate. I believe that both countries should pay attention to both the risk and opportunity China poses on them and to the world. I was particularly worried at that time that Americans at that time tended to dismiss the risk aspect of China's rise. When the Japanese scholar, I actually led a different project with Jim Schoff and others from the American side about the future of U.S.-Japan alliance. And in 2014, 15, 16, around that time, Japanese scholars tended to point out that the rise of increasingly assertive China is dangerous for the alliance. And the American scholars tended to say that, Japanese are kind of preoccupied with risk aspect of China. You have to pay more attention to the opportunity China presents. Now the picture is totally different. The United States has recognized the danger associated with the associated with the increasing assertiveness of China. The United States today is not hesitant to take a tough confrontational approach to China to protect the existing rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Japan basically welcomes such a shift in U.S.-China policy. Many Japanese security experts have been relieved to see that Americans have finally become serious about China's rise. However, at the same time, due to the geographical proximity, Japan cannot afford too bad relations with China. So while Japan welcomes the United States, who now pays much keener attention to China risk, Japan now also thinks that the United States should maintain an appropriate level of attention to the China opportunity. For example, Japanese and American perception and understandings of China's influence in the ASEAN countries are considerably different. Japanese have greater understanding than Americans, I think, of the meaning of China's economic expansion in the ASEAN countries to the people in those countries. That is, China represents big economic and technological opportunities for those people living in ASEAN countries. And those opportunities, neither Japan nor the United States are now presenting to them. Americans, who is located far away from ASEAN seems to fail to understand this reality. I don't say that Japan 100% understand how ASEAN countries see China's influence on those countries, but I can say that the Japanese, because of geographical proximity, have more understanding than the Americans about those opportunity aspects for the ASEAN people about China's economy and technology presents to them. And I want to emphasize, in order to prevail, we want to prevail in the strategic competition with China. Americans have become, willing to do that in recent years, and particularly after the Pence speech last year. And Japanese welcomed that policy shift in the United States. But in order to prevail in the strategic competition with China, I think the U.S.-Japan alliance needs to attract third countries to their side, not to China's side. In order to do that, it is not sufficient to alarm the dangers or risks associated with China's increasingly assertive external policy. We have to pay attention to the reality that some aspect of China's external behavior is actually bringing opportunity to many countries in the world, particularly to the ASEAN countries. In other words, some aspect of China's external behavior is attractive to those countries. And then accepting that reality, facing to that reality, if we want to prevail in the strategic competition with China, we will have to find a way to cooperate with China where it's necessary, where it's possible. And also we have to present a better alternative prepared by ourselves to those countries who now have to be attracted to China and have no alternative. We have to attract, if we do not want to see those countries attracted to China, we have to attract them, and we need some kind of alternative which is attractive enough to those countries. Many Japanese foreign and security policy experts, including myself, wonder if Americans are paying sufficient attention to this reality. We need to be attractive to the third countries. Of course, we have to alarm to the third countries about the danger and risk associated with China's rise, China's increasing self-assertiveness, but that's not sufficient. Other perception gaps caused by geographical difference include that with regard to nuclear and ballistic missile threat posed by China. With regard to nuclear and ballistic missile capability of China, main source of concern for the United States are China's ICBMs and SLBMs, of course. But Japan has to also worry about short and medium-ranged missiles. And after observing the military parade conducted by Beijing on this October 1st, that was spectacular. But after observing that, this perception gap looms larger in the minds of Japanese security and foreign policy experts than before. So how can the two allies manage such perception gaps and sustain a good level of policy coordination vis-à-vis China? Actually, our project is a 3-year project, and we have just completed our 2nd year by publishing a wonderful report thanks to Jim Schauf's efforts and Carnegie's efforts. But our project has 1 more year to go. And we will try to give some answer to this question. How can the two allies manage such perception gaps and sustain a good level of policy coordination vis-à-vis China? We may not be able to fill the gaps, close the gaps, but accepting the reality that there are some gaps, and that may be even increasing, widening, we can find a way to manage those gaps to sustain a good level of policy coordination. That's our challenge for the next several months. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kamiya-sensei. Let me turn to Carla Freeman to take the next step for us. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and thank you. I'll call you Jim because you're my neighbor, but thank you also to Kamiya-sensei for the opportunity to participate in this project. And I also want to thank Kawashima-sensei as well And I'm sorry she's not here, but the Southeast Asia specialist, Professor Mia Obo, with whom I co-authored this report. This report is just the beginning of as Jim said, it's a work in progress. It addresses a moving target at a time where a 24-hour news cycle feels like 24 months. You know, I taught until very late in the evening last night, and I walk in today feeling like I know nothing because I don't know what happened the last few hours. But in any case, this is the beginning of a project, and we'll keep working on it. And I look forward to your comments. In my contribution to this report with Professor Oba, we look at China's BRI as a tool of China's economic statecraft toward Southeast Asia, ASEAN, that quite literally recognizes that China and the region have a common interest. They can work together. China can export its overcapacity for large-scale infrastructure development, and it can help the region address a substantial infrastructure deficit. The ADB has estimated that as an annual shortfall of about $102 billion a year for the next couple of decades. So the region has welcomed the already hundreds of billions of dollars that have flowed from Chinese sources into it since the BRI was launched 6 years ago. Much of the capital goes to fund transportation links that connect hubs in the region to Chinese cities, and that, of course, is one of the many ways that the BRI is weaving the Chinese and regional economies and societies together and helping to reinforce China's already substantial role as an economic player in the region. In the last decade, in fact, China has become the region's most important trade partner. Its regional share of trade has risen while the shares of the United States, the European Union, and Japan, which have historically been the region's largest trading partners, have been on steady decline. I say that, but actually our trade with the region grew substantially, and I'll mention that, grew substantially in the last 6 months. ASEAN has risen to China's #2 trading partner, surpassing the United States, and now Europe is in the #1 slot. This trend is in part the result of the fact that the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area entered into force about 9 years ago, but it has also been accelerated by the U.S. trade war. China is buying and trading a lot more with ASEAN. It rose 4% in the first half of this year, and that's also pushing progress toward negotiations on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And when that is negotiated and concluded, the negotiations are concluded, that will be the largest trading bloc in the world, comprising roughly 50% of the global economy. The BRI has also linked the Chinese and ASEAN economies more closely in other ways. It's broadened the use of the renminbi by ASEAN members through currency swap arrangements with Southeast Asian states. We mentioned the agreement between Indonesia and China, but that China and ASEAN are also negotiating on including the renminbi in the ASEAN's currency swap safety net, along with the yen, actually, and that will reduce that arrangement's reliance on the dollar. China is also promoting the digital Silk Road concept in the region. That idea was introduced as part of the BRI in 2015. And of course, the digital economy is on the agenda of the ASEAN Summit. The second Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation that took place in the spring saw the regional players discussing a lot of new bilateral projects with China, and that included new arrangements using Chinese digital technologies. Alibaba is a big player. Tencent, Didi Chuxing, they've also invested in ride-hailing services in the region, et cetera. So a much bigger role for Chinese technology in the region, and that includes also the expansion of the use of Chinese technical standards. China has a program to promote Chinese technical standards around the world, and the region is, as it absorbs more and more technology and infrastructure, is becoming one of the front lines for that. And it's notable that during the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Bangkok this summer, China was declared the most important dialogue partner of ASEAN countries. That is a significant development, I think. So you have to conclude from all of this that as China's stakes grow in BRI participating countries in the region, and ASEAN stakes in China's economic engagement in the region rise, that Beijing's preferences are going to carry heavier weight in the region's foreign and security policies. And you'll see, I note that defense cooperation between China and the region has been growing and is highlighted in China's 2019 Defense White Paper. And it's if you compare this year's white paper to the 2015 white paper, you will see that in 2015, China references its relationship to ASEAN in the defense arena as engaging in multilateral dialogues and cooperation mechanisms. In this white paper, it addresses the bilateral dimensions of defense cooperation with ASEAN countries, and also highlights the China-ASEAN maritime exercise that took place last year. So there are China's pursuit of its own strategic agenda in this context is already, I think, well known to all of you, having divisive effects on intra-regional relations on the South China Sea. In the case of Cambodia, of course, it sort of can be seen as the canary in the mine. Cambodia has, on 2 occasions, played a role in resisting efforts to include statements on the South China Sea. Within ASEAN in 2012, no communique was issued, and then in 2016, Cambodia blocked mention to the Philippines arbitration ruling against Beijing in the statement. At the same time, of course, Southeast Asian countries have complex historical relationships with China, and they would far prefer to balance Beijing's potentially overwhelming influence by diversifying their foreign partnerships, both with allies and with other security partners. So there is a strong case so Southeast Asian countries are receptive to greater ties with the United States, and of course the United States has a strong interest in continuing to maintain important ties with Southeast Asia. It's expected to become the 4th largest economy in the world by 2050, and that will exert an even greater gravitational pull on economic gravitational pull in the world. It's already supporting the source of a lot of U.S. jobs. It's the 4th largest export market for the United States already. And our export growth has been steady, although not keeping pace with China's economic growth, export growth to the region. It's been holding steady since the 1997 Asian financial crisis. It jumped over 10% from 2017 last year. And we should note, too, that the region's 635 million residents live in democracies, although many of these remain quite fragile. But there are clearly strains in U.S. relations with the region. A colleague yesterday noted that despite this administration's criticism of multilateral organizations, that kind of criticism has not been leveled at ASEAN. Nonetheless, the fact that last year President Trump skipped the East Asia Summit and the U.S.-ASEAN Summit in Singapore, that was read very poorly in the region, and suggested to regional leaders that the United States wasn't putting the same level of priority on relations with ASEAN. I won't speak to Japanese interests in the region. I just want to highlight that in the area of infrastructure, because that's the focus of our report, Japan remains an extremely important player, and it is actually its role in infrastructure development in the region remains greater than that of China. Its projects in the region's 6 largest economies are more than $100 billion, represent more than $100 billion more in investment than does China today, even though China has been increasing its investment in this area through the BRI. So that's sort of the context in which we discuss the opportunities and risks of what we assess as potentially weakening American influence in the region against China's increasingly dynamic role in the region. And also a potentially competitive dynamic emerging between the established source of foreign direct investment and infrastructure development, Japan in the region, and China on the economic front. We identified a number of opportunities for improved policy coordination between the U.S. and Japan on regional development. Obviously, the United States did pass the BUILD Act investment, and that doubles the U.S. commitment to overseas development financing. And Japan has its own expanded partnership for quality infrastructure and its own projects and coordinated with India. Australia and the European Union also have their own strategies for connectivity in Asia that we might coordinate with. And there are other opportunities to work together to provide regional public goods in the security arena. The United States did its CCAT exercise this year and in August, and that included the partners in the region and as well as Japan, and we might be able to expand more activities in that area. I think I'll just end on a point that is a thread throughout and a conclusion throughout all of our reports, which is that there are differences in the free and open Indo-Pacific concept, which can help organize U.S.-Japan cooperation in the region. And the Japanese description of free and open Indo-Pacific is vision or concept, and we have a strategy. There are differences in the two approaches to the region, and it's important that we cooperate and coordinate and continue this dialogue. And I think this project will help us do that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Carla. It's terrific, and it gives you a flavor of what's in their policy brief, Bridging the Belt and Road Divide. Some of the digital connectivity issues and standard setting issues are talked about in a paper that I did with Professor Ase Ito on competing with China on technology and innovation. So there's a broad range of topics that we cover in the project. I want to turn now to Professor Kawashima. He co-authored with some of the other members the kind of umbrella paper on managing risks and opportunities for the U.S.-Japan alliance through coordinated China policy and the responding to China's complicated views on the international order paper as well. But Kawashima-sensei?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I'm Shin Kawashima. I'm teaching at Tokyo University. My background is a historian to research about Chinese diplomatic history. But as you know, China is expanding into the world, so yeah, scholars of Chinese history has to go to the world, including Africa and Latin America and others. Yes, in this project, I have to emphasize that the U.S.-Japan alliance basically share the perception and the policies on China. This is precondition. However, as Professor Kamiya said, there are some differences on China, and I here strengthen that China also pays strong attention to these such differences between U.S. and Japan. This is a point. So we have to be conscious of these differences, and also we have to distinguish the good difference and bad differences. But I say that, for example, on Taiwan problem, there are some differences between U.S. and Japan. USA is much more aggressive or some positive to push to support Taiwan now. Okay, however, Japan hesitates to do same policy as USA. So this March, Tsai Ing-wen suddenly suddenly proposed the one policy that Taiwan proposed to make a new security dialogue with Japan, but Japan rejected it. Okay. So yes. However, I think if Japan adopt the same policy on Taiwan as the USA, the security or military tension in East Asia will be enhancing. For such a difference, differences are good or the efficient difference, I think. However, for example, the other missile problem, okay, and others, some differences are managed. It is necessary for us to manage the others, right, the bad differences, I think. From Chinese point of view, such differences are so attractive. Okay, it is a point. As you know, China has specific views on the international order. China separates the international politics and the international economy on this, on their perception of norms and order. On international politics, China supports the United Nations, UN. China basically advanced the policies on the UN, on the international politics and security. So China expanded its military service to the Africa based on the PKO and others. Yeah. However, on the economy, China, yes, they strengthened their status that China support the free and rule-based international order, and China support the World Bank, IMF, WTO. Okay, it's interesting. And in international politics, China criticized the U.S.-Japan alliance as the legacy of the Cold War. Yeah. So in 2016, Ms. Fu Yim, she was the high-ranked diplomat in China. She made a speech at Chatham House in London. She said that there is the world order, not international, world order, as so-called the Pax Americana in the world. Yeah, this world order has three elements. The first is U.S. military alignment. Second is Western values. Third is UN and its institutions. China only supports third part, UN only. The other one, the security, U.S. security alignment and the Western values, yes, China does not support the two elements. It's so clear. Yeah, China does not, yes, criticize all of existence norms in orders. China supports some parts, okay, of the existing orders. In the international politics, China supports UN. It's no problem. It's okay. China has veto. And the other one, international economic order, China supports the most of existing order. Yes, it is so confusing. From Chinese point of view, in the economic field, USA, this is Chinese point of view, not Japan. From Chinese point of view, USA adopts the protectionism on the trade and so on, but Japan not. Japan supports the free and rule-based international order in the international economy. This is Chinese point of view. So China can be against USA on this point. However, China can support or cooperate with Japan, via BRI and so on. Okay. And also Japan also welcome, because as you know, Japan, if you check the public poll in Japan, you find that most of Japanese people, 90% Japanese people has negative feeling on China. Okay, so Japan is so anti-China. However, if we add the next question, do you think that Sino-Japan relations are important for Japan? More than 90% Japanese answered yes, important. This is interesting. So China also understands this point. Okay. So the Prime Minister Abe also understands such a public opinion in Japan. So Abe administration was founded in 2012. So he expressed the anti-Chinese attitude at first. And in 2014, he changed his attitude toward China. And also in 2017, Abe suddenly said that he could support Chinese BRI if China accepted 4 conditions, like transparency, openness, and economic characteristics, and financial goodness, and something, 4 conditions. Okay. And afterwards, China welcomed Abe's proposal. And after it, so-called Chinese-Japanese relations will be, the change will be the situation, and so-called improvement has been emerging in this couple of years. So next spring, cherry blossom season, Xi Jinping will come to Japan. However, this situation is realized basically in the economy, the field of international economy. So on the international politics or security, situation is not changed. So if you check the website of Japanese Coast Guard and download the chart, that shows the number of Chinese public vessels enter the territorial water of the connecting water of the Senkaku Islands. The number of ships are increasing in this couple of years. Yeah. So although the top leaders exchanges emerging, Abe and Xi Jinping recruitment. And last month, Ministry of the National Security of China detained one Japanese historian who studies in Hokkaido University, academic person. China detained him. It is so shocking news to the Japanese Academy. So there is strong tension in such a political and security field. So we have to check the Chinese side. So Carla said, I mentioned about Southeast Asia. Also, we have to check the perception of the other side. How does China see our alliance? How does China use our differences? And how does Southeast Asian countries expect or the hope to the U.S. Japan alliance or China? So we can pay attention to the Chinese perception, Chinese policies, and other countries' views, is my opinion. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a great compliment to the other presentations. And your introduction of this complexity aspect, I think, is so appropriate. In the United States as well, obviously, our opinions are not monolithic, and this was discussed to some extent at our workshop. I think one Japanese scholar summarized it as there's kind of view A in the United States on China, which assumes that China is actively challenging the regional order and will later kind of seek to undermine or create kind of its own vision of a world order, whereas there's kind of view B that says, yes, there's some regional challenge, but it's not it's within manageable boundaries, and that the challenge to global order or seeking kind of global preeminence is certainly not preordained and really depends on U.S. actions as well. We see the Chicago Council on Global Affairs put out a poll that came out just a couple weeks ago that indicated that 2/3 of Americans think the United States should pursue a policy of friendly cooperation and engagement with China rather than work to limit its growth. So this idea of moving target and the complexity of perceptions, I think, is very apt. I'm going to open it up to the audience in just a minute, but I wanted to ask the panel a couple of questions or get your reactions to some of the things that we talked about yesterday. The first is this idea we talked about whether or not Japan could kind of play a bridging role to some extent on some of these issues where there are gaps between the United States and China, and whether there would be potentially some growing convergence with China on certain issues, that even if today, for example, in terms of freedom of navigation, there are obviously differences of opinion or tensions between the United States and China, of course, but we see in the Persian Gulf and challenges to easy, secure transshipment of energy supplies out of the region. China has been willing to potentially be a part of a coalition or contribute to an international effort to protect sea lanes there. Chinese attitudes toward intellectual property rights. We had an interesting presentation where if you actually track U.S. attitudes towards intellectual property rights, we used to steal a lot of technology back in the 1800s, and it was only later, once we reached a certain level of accomplishment, that we decided that it was really important to protect these intellectual property rights. Are there areas where we could eventually actively kind of try to shape or move in that direction? So I wanted to ask about this idea of Japan as a possible bridge on some of these issues in terms of the leveraging the good gaps, I guess, in a way, between the U.S. and China.
I'm not very sure if a bridging role is a proper expression of the role which Japan is going to or is willing to play between the United States and China. First of all, I mean, there's a very strong, wide consensus among the Japanese public, not only among the experts, but also in the general public, informed public, that Japan is the ally of the United States and should remain so, despite the increasing influence of China internationally. That's one thing. And the other thing is that despite the ongoing improvement in Japan's relations with China, there's again quite a strong recognition that Japan has to cooperate with the United States to protect the existing comfortable international environment for the country. That's a rules-based order and others. So I mean, bridging the two countries sounds like as if Japan sees both the United States and China kind of equal distance or kind of things. But that's not the case. Japan is willing to remain a sincere ally of the United States. Having said that, as I mentioned, Japan sometimes feels that the United States, since 2 years ago, around, suddenly became too tough against China, almost ignoring the opportunity aspect of China presents to the world and to the United States and to Japan, so on and so forth. And from Japan's point of view, that's not a good idea. We have to accept the reality that China is exercising both bad influence and good influence to the international society, and particularly to those countries who are still developing. And in the Indo-Pacific, I mean, like in ASEAN countries and so on, China is attractive in some aspect. And Japan wants to tell to the United States that you have to see more about that reality. And Japan can cooperate with that. I mean, with that kind of thing with the United States too. And that can be described as a bridging role in some sense, but as I mentioned, I mean, Japan wants to remain an ally of the United States, not a kind of balancer between China and the United States. So that's what I would say.
Well, I mean, a bridging role is a challenge in that China and Japan obviously have their own history and special dynamic, and relations between those two countries is often fraught. But I think in the context of the BRI, which was the focus of the report that Mia Oba and I worked on, there is a bridging role to be played by Japan in that Japan is such a significant source of foreign direct investment and infrastructure financing in the region, and it does that kind of development with very, very high standards. And one of the concerns that the United States has, strategic concerns aside, is that the BRI could result in poor investments that will encumber countries with higher levels of debt, also roll over human rights issues and so forth, and that Japan still has a very important role to play, and I think the United States can work with Japan, particularly through the expanded partnership for quality infrastructure and its own Build Act funding to get more involved in infrastructure development in the region. And the ADB is also going to be a player, can be a player there as well. So I think that is a place where we should really focus attention.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes. Actually, Chinese scholars also expect Japan play the bridging role between U.S. and China. And I usually answer this the question: yes, Japan does not have enough power to play a bridging role between the two big countries. However, actually, sometimes Japan can play a bridging role between two big powers. For example, FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific. In China, most of scholars and officials recognize FOIP as just a hostile or the negative toward China. Okay. However, and also USA emphasize the elements of the military or security on FOIP. However, Japan strengthens the much more general elements of FOIP, including the economic cooperation, or the other part, or some cooperation and some regional governance and so on. And as you know, this year, ASEAN also proposed ASEAN-styled FOIP, ASEAN version FOIP. So ASEAN version FOIP shares many elements with the Japanese side. And China recognizes maybe that if FOIP become the ASEAN version or general version FOIP, China's BRI and FOIP can share some elements, basically on a regional cooperation and the economy. I think so. Japan, yes, has pushed and advanced such a general elements and as FOIP. So I think yes, it's I don't know whether Japan has intention or not. However, yes, in fact, Japan sometimes Japan plays a bridging role between the U.S. and China, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I mean, to some extent, it's a modest example, perhaps, but when Japan was hosting the G20 most recently, together with the United States and some other countries, the EU, for example, they were able to get China to sign on to G20 principles for infrastructure investment, or I forget exactly what the term is, but that's a potential example there. It's also interesting because this came up in the Chinese views of international order versus kind of world order, or China positioning itself as, or viewing itself as, in some ways, a protector of international order, trying to cast the United States currently as a destroyer of international order, particularly in the economic context and the use of tariffs, et cetera. So TPP-11, or the efforts at trade liberalization building in East Asia, in part led by Japan, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, China certainly feels like TPP is kind of potentially negative vis-a-vis China, but maybe there's some opportunity to participate in this regional order as well. So it's interesting to see how these unfold. That said, another issue that was kind of brought up yesterday, and this will be my last question for the group, but this growing gap between national democracy or national governance and national economy or economic governance. So when we're looking at all the different kind of supply chain migration and changes and influence of exports and imports and investment back and forth, sometimes we tend to look at this data in a very national view. Country X exporting this amount to electronics or something to country B. But the reality is the economic piece is much more integrated and goes beyond borders because of the supply chain relationship. So just adding up what one country is exporting to another country doesn't actually capture how many companies within that country are actually have their national headquarters back in Japan or in the United States. And yet, China in particular is looking to govern issues of politics and national governance in a purely border kind of defined way. And we see this then overlapping in areas of the NBA, saying something about Hong Kong or maps related to in a Disney movie with a 9-dash line or references to Taiwan in an airline magazine, et cetera. This effort, this struggle between kind of national democracy, border defined, and the economic issue. So how is this kind of viewed between the United States and Japan, or in the context of risk and opportunity in your mind? Please.
Yes, as Jim said, real economy is globalized. Okay? So Japanese companies make investment in China and USA and other areas. So it's nonsense to strengthen the nationalized context. However, on the discourse level, especially China strengthen the national economy, Chinese GDP, Chinese something, to mobilize some nationalism. Okay, and also technology. The development technology is basically globalized. Right? However, China recently utilized the science technology as the base of the nationalism. So we have to, distinguish and make it make clear that the real economy, differences between the real economy and such a discourses or discourse politics, I think. So we do not, if we are confusing on this point, it is so easy for us to be, influenced by such a discourses. Okay.
I missed that part of our discussion yesterday, and I haven't reflected on it, but it seems to me that in China's behavior with respect to the NBA and some of these other acts has been almost enabled by the weaponization of trade and economic issues, and so we have this economic nationalism intertwined with efforts to promote Chinese interests, as we are also using our economic heft to advance our national interests in a way that we hadn't before. So there isn't that line between the economy, the globalized economy, and national security interests that there was before in the last 2 years, really.
Please.
I think there's a serious asymmetry between China and us, liberal democracies, with regard to the, how do you call it, intrusiveness of national border. And China obviously has been trying to utilize the this asymmetry for their advantage. And the biggest challenge for us is that during the Cold War era, and probably until the end of 20th century, we assumed that real economic prosperity cannot be achieved without more intrusive international national border. I mean, in other words, I mean, you have to be democratized. You have to become more liberal to become really prosperous. But China is the first country which breaks such past common sense. China is not liberal. China is not democratic. China's national border is quite, how do you say, less intrusive than our national border. But still, China achieves quite a great prosperity. In some cases, I mean, some aspect of China's prosperity surpasses our national prosperity, our prosperity. And yeah, we are facing a very difficult situation.
And I think it adds to the complexity of managing this between the U.S.-Japan alliance, because there is no kind of Office of China policy in the United States that really connects the trade, export controls, economic, diplomatic, security, et cetera. So within the alliance, if you're going to coordinate this, it's either with very dedicated and interested people at the NSC to NSC level, or you have some mechanism by which there's sufficient coordination and communication at all these other different levels. But I want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions as well. So please wait for a microphone, let us know who you are, and ask your question, and I'll start with Gil.
Gil Rosman, the ASEAN Forum. I wonder if we could hear more clearly what are the differences between Japan and the United States on policy towards China. We heard on BRI, we heard about Taiwan, and also wasn't there a response in many Japanese publications in 2017, at least, that it was so wonderful to have Trump instead of Obama, because he really carried out freedom of navigation operations, and he was more serious about dealing with China. When did that actually change? That the Japanese decided, wait, hey, the U.S. is really not handling China properly, and on what issues can you identify?
Yes. For example, about the BRI, Japan does not criticize all of BRI. Yes, Japanese scholars and officials understand some, dangerousness of Chinese debt trap and Chinese military ambition and so on. However, Japanese companies or Japanese economic society wants to get some interests from BRI. And also the Japanese economic society is interested in the BRI itself on the economic field, because there are so many big infrastructure projects. So Japanese companies wants to get some economic interest. Okay, so Japanese government wants to manage the dangerous parts of the BRI. So Abe proposed the 4 conditions to share with China to manage it. I know it is so difficult for Japan to manage China, but yes, Japan proposed 4 conditions. So but USA's attitude toward BRI is different, I think, much more aggressive, much more negative. Yes, so there are so many differences.
Well, please, and I'll add some of mine to the list.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to add one thing. That is, yes, I mean, Japan has, as I said, I mean, Japan has welcomed U.S. shift in the shift in U.S.-China policy under the Trump administration, in the sense that the U.S. has become serious enough to be increasing assertiveness of China, which Japan has been worried about for many years. And during the Obama administration, Japan was often frustrated with the kind of too soft an attitude toward China taken by the Obama administration. Actually, Obama administration China policy fluctuated from the engagement side and hedging side, and that actually annoyed the Japanese. And in that sense, I mean, the Trump administration China policy has been welcomed by Japan, but since 2017, I mean, the basic, how do you say, direction of U.S. policy is still welcomed, but what U.S. is actually doing to taking, what kind of measures U.S. is actually taking toward China, that has become kind of annoying to Japan again. I mean, again, as I said, I mean, it seems sometimes to be too confrontational or too kind of too much focus upon the risk and too much too less focus on opportunity. And Japan believes that both sides has to be paid attention by not only by Japan but also by the United States. For example, I mean, FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific Strategy or Vision. The U.S. FOIP seems to be kind of too tough, too confrontational against China from Japanese point of view. Of course, Japanese FOIP has includes an intention to check China's increasing assertiveness, and that's obvious. But my observation is that the Japanese government under Abe administration knows that in order to make FOIP successful, our efforts, I mean, efforts by Japan and the United States alone is not sufficient. And two countries, two allies has to attract other countries to their idea of FOIP. And in order to attract those countries to, those third countries to the idea of FOIP, they have to, Japan and the United States show when it is possible to cooperate with China, under what condition, kind of things. So Prime Minister Abe has been taking somewhat more cooperative approach towards China than he did some years ago, but that not means that he became a kind of conciliatory toward China. He wants to check China's increasing assertiveness. That's not been changed. But in order to check China's increasing assertiveness, Japanese understanding is that Japan needs a cooperation from third countries, not only from the United States, but also from ASEAN and other countries. And those other countries do not want the United States and Japan to take a too confrontational, simplistic approach toward China. I think that's the point.
I guess I would underscore, certainly there are a lot of commonalities between the U.S. and Japanese views, and so we tend to focus a lot on the gaps or the subtle differences, but there are a lot of common views. But certainly in the area of trade and technology, so some of the areas that the U.S. is going in with regard to export controls, with regard to investment restrictions, there's a lot of concern, I think, in Japan about not only what kind of impact this will have on China in terms of how China reacts, but then also to what extent Japanese firms get caught up into some of that as well. A few subtle differences, I think, on North Korea policy in terms of how to approach the role of China vis-a-vis North Korea, at least currently. And then also in some of the security areas, obviously we have a lot of common views on security issues vis-a-vis China, and I think many in Japan actually were not critical of the U.S. withdrawal from the INF Treaty, for example, primarily with the idea that maybe this would allow the United States to apply some kind of check or pressure or leverage vis-a-vis China on theater missile developments, but it's not clear to me that. But I think there are some subtle differences there too, or we haven't even really had a mature conversation within the alliance of exactly where do we go from here, and what's the balance between how we address Russia vis-a-vis China in the region. So those are just some other examples. I mean, the 5G, other issues. Again, Japan largely in sync with us, but not necessarily out there going and trying to pressure other countries to avoid or abandon 5G at the expense of being able to trade with us or have share intelligence information, et cetera.
One really quick point. It seems to me that the harder line that the United States has taken in the region has enabled an improved relationship between China and Japan because Japan has to live in the region and has to deal with China, and I think it has been able to carve out a different space and distinguish itself in some areas from the United States' harder line approach.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to the presenters for some excellent talks. My question is about, Dan Bob with the Reischauer Center at SAIS, sorry. My question is about some potential problems in the alliance that may have implications not just for U.S.-Japan relations, but for China. Couple things. First, the president has long held for more than 3 decades some real questions about alliances themselves, and has often talked about, going back 30, 35 years, how our allies have not paid up enough to support the troops that we have stationed overseas. Next year, the host nation support is going to come up for negotiation, and President has talked, I believe, about costs covering the entire costs to the United States plus an additional 50%. I wonder how those negotiations may fare and what that might imply. More importantly, on a second issue is North Korea. The president really does seem to want a deal, and as the election comes closer, I think his desire for a deal with North Korea is going to increase. If the president were, for example, to accept a nuclear North Korea, what might that mean for the alliance and implications for China? As I'm sure you're aware, the president has talked previously, particularly during the 2016 campaign, about how it would be a good thing if South Korea and Japan, he also talked about Saudi Arabia getting nuclear weapons. We've got the Turks now who want nuclear weapons. So if I could get some sense of what those two issues might, what the impact might be on the bilateral relationship, but also on dealing with China, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. My name is Sawamura from the Asahi Shimbun, Washington Bureau Chief. Jim just touched upon this issue, but it has been long time said that United States have alliance, but China doesn't have the alliance. But as Jim-san just touched upon that, China and also Russia have more closer relationships the last couple of years, especially in the military basis. How does it make impact on the U.S.-Japan policy vis-à-vis the China? Is my question.
So 3 different little kind of questions. I open them up to the field.
To the first 2 questions. First of all, I mean, the Trump idea that the U.S.-Japan alliance has been unfair alliance, that's not accepted by the Japanese, because both countries receive different benefits, but benefits from the alliance. That's one thing. I mean, you know, Japan is protected by the United States to a large extent. That's the reality. But also, Japan allows the United States to station a large number of forces in its own soil while during the peacetime, and accept a military bases there. And that has a significant strategic meaning for the U.S. world strategy. Having said that, Trump's dissatisfaction that Japan is not doing sufficiently, that has some appeal to the Japanese public in recent days. Yes, I mean, Japan's defense spending is still less than 1% compared with its GDP. And increasing number of Japanese feels that on that point alone, Trump is somewhat reasonable. But having said that, Japanese are very worried about, Trump's attitude, which seems to have, seems to accept or admit sufficient significance to U.S. alliance in its foreign policy. And about nuclear North Korea, that's a disaster scenario for Japan if the United States or China or international society accepts the nuclear North Korea. I probably have said this in this conference room or somewhere at Carnegie in different room before last year or sometime, but I repeat, I mean, international order in East Asia has been rested upon what I call a nuclear order in East Asia. And nuclear order in East Asia has rested on the nuclear order in Northeast Asia. And that nuclear order in Northeast Asia has rested upon one assumption, that Japan, who can go nuclear if it wants, remains non-nuclear. And Japan has maintained a non-nuclear status more than 50 years since it achieved economic superpower or big power status in the late 1960s. But Japanese self-restraint rested upon another assumption, that is, as long as Japan maintains its non-nuclear policy, the international society will not accept any other countries in the region to go nuclear. And that's now very shaky because North Korea has obtained nuclear weapons. And the last straw could be the acceptance by the international society of, giving a nuclear weapon state status by international society, particularly the United States, to North Korea. That will undermine the very foundation of Japan's self-restraint. I believe that the Japanese hates nuclear weapons so strongly that it's not very easy for any Japanese government to decide that the country go nuclear. But I can say that the foundation of Japan's self-restraints will become more shaky and the debate could happen and so on and so forth.
Does anybody want to touch on the Russia-China question and implications for how to approach China?
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. Very, very stimulating questions. About North Korea, yes, as Kamiya-san said, the worst scenario for Japan is the USA compromise on nuclear and also the long-range missiles. USA only manage long-range missiles, but that compromise on the middle and short-range missile is disaster for Japan. Big problem. Okay. Actually, Japan worried about on this point because when USA was eager to manage the North Korea program, when North Korea announced it exploit the long-range missiles. Before that point, USA was not so eager to manage this point. So Washington DC is located to the Atlantic Ocean. The USA is not located at East Asia. Yes, Japanese people are worried about this point. Secondly, yes, I heard one interesting rumor, not information, that China and Russia have intention to enhance its cooperation level and the military cooperation level to the alliance, military alliance. I think it's a rumor, but there something there is atmosphere on such a level. If the U.S., Russia, and China will enhance its military level of military cooperation, there's a big problem for Japan, and also we have to pay attention to the situation in Japan Sea and Okhotsk Sea and the northern part of Japan. And also, they will cooperate on not cooperate on navy, but also army in the Central Asia, maybe. Such a cooperation in Central Asia between Russia and China will influence on the situation in Indian Ocean, I think.
So far, China just keeps upgrading its strategic relationship with Russia, but there is a debate inside China, and many of you will know, led by Yan Xietong, the scholar in China, about the utility of an alliance with Russia. The repercussions would be tremendous for the whole region were that to happen. And I guess I could imagine something like that in the context of some kind of Taiwan scenario, but what does Russia get? And it's a hard to kind of game out, but something to think about because it's under debate in Chinese policy circles.
Well, and I think in the context of our discussions yesterday, it would be a fundamental shift if it really moved in that direction. This idea of convergence, this idea of bridging, this idea of finding areas of cooperation becomes so much more difficult in that context if you're thinking about it in a context of a Russia-China alliance. But hopefully that's just a hypothetical situation. We've kind of reached the end. I might be able to squeeze in one last very quick question if I can. I have let me call on you here. Got a microphone coming for you. You had some gender diversity in our questions here.
Thank you so much. My question is so general. The first, yes, my name is Riho Aizawa, grad student at Elliott School and research intern at Hudson Institute. And the first one is, how do Chinese international commercial courts work and support their OBOR projects currently? And the second one is, how should we, the United States and Japan, evaluate or deal with their international courts? Because the court seems to lie over both Chinese risks and opportunities for us.
I'm not very familiar with the court questions. So
That is a work in progress. None of us know very much about it. It's a good area to look at more closely, but the court would be in China. This is a way of adjudicating disputes within the BRI, sort of, if you call it a framework. But these would be the court, or this body would be integrated into the Chinese court system. So it's intriguing, but that's about the extent of my knowledge. We mentioned this in our report, and there's a citation to a little bit more information. But it's part of China's effort to now develop some institutions to support the BRI, and there are a number of those underway.
Short answer. China opened the judicial center at Shenzhen City to manage some judicial problem in the BRI. Yeah, and also the China utilize its own aid or financial investment in the BRI to expand its own commercial code. Okay. That is a big problem. However, it's a difficult for us to control it. From Laos or Cambodia, the lower developed countries' point of view, they do not have other scenario. If Japan can provide huge investment towards Laos instead of China, it's okay, no problem. However, Japan does not have enough money, financial power, now. So from Laos' point of view, it is, they are compared to accepting the Chinese money. They do not have other scenario. It's a big point. So what we can do, we support some human resource to support their a capability to manage the financial problem or commercial law. So we have to consider what we can do. Thank you.
Yeah, especially if we can leverage the UN system or a multilateral system a little bit. I would think the way the AIIB has found ways to collaborate with the Asia Development Bank and others, perhaps there's a way that we can we can steer that kind of international standards in that regard. We've reached the end of our time. I want to thank I want to thank all of you for coming here today and participating, and I want to thank Japan Forum International Relations and our panelists today for their participation and presentations. Please join me in thanking them. And there's still